Have you ever sat in silence, knowing the answer but swallowing your voice because the room wasn't built for people like you? Have you ever watched someone with extraordinary potential go overlooked, buried under the weight of traditions and unspoken rules? This is the story of Lena Grace, a young woman who walked into a centuries-old institution and, with quiet courage, began to shift its future. Picture Savannah, Georgia, a place where history breathes through every brick and blossom. Spanish moss sways like lace from the ancient oaks, and the cobblestone streets hum with echoes of old Southern stories. Nestled in the heart of this graceful city is the Carrile Inn, a three-generation family-run hotel, standing proud and polished like a relic of tradition. It's the kind of place where charm isn't just an aesthetic, it's a way of life. Guests are greeted with honeyed smiles and warm tea, where every room tells a story and every employee plays their part in a symphony of Southern hospitality. But like many dynasties built on legacy, the roots of tradition sometimes grow too deep, wrapping around the new and squeezing the life out of change before it has a chance to bloom. Lena Grace stepped through the carved mahogany doors of the Carrile Inn on a brisk October morning. Her palms were damp, her breaths shallow with anticipation. At 23, she was fresh from hospitality school, the ink still wet on her degree. But her dreams, they had been fermenting for years, bold and effervescent. She was the first in her family to go to college, raised on grit and late-night sacrifices. Her mother cleaned homes by day and stocked shelves by night. Her father hauled freight on graveyard shifts. Every dollar they poured into Lena's education carried the weight of unspoken hopes. She wore her navy blazer, the one she'd saved up for over 6 months, paired with neatly pressed slacks and shoes polished to a hopeful shine. Her spine straightened, not just with confidence, but with awareness, because in places like the Carrile Inn, every move you made was silently evaluated. Your name, your background, the weight of your lineage, all whispered louder than your resume ever could. The lobby was a ballet of order and energy. Staff glided past one another with choreographed precision. Crystal chandeliers refracted the soft morning sun, casting gold across marble floors. Lena observed everything, the way the concierge didn't just remember names but preferences, how the bellhop adjusted his pace to match the age of the guests he assisted. It was art, disguised as service. From the elevator stepped Gavin Carrile, third-generation heir and general manager. He was mid-conversation, eyes flicking between his phone and the front desk, multitasking like a man used to orchestrating chaos. At 37, he bore the regal confidence of someone raised to lead. But behind his easy smile was the subtle exhaustion of a man trying to keep legacy from slipping through his fingers. "You must be our new intern," he said, sliding his phone into his blazer pocket and offering a firm, practiced handshake. "Welcome to the Carrile family. We believe in learning by doing here, so expect to hit the ground running." Lena's response was steady, but her heart thundered in her chest. "Thank you for this opportunity, Mr. Carrile. I'm really excited to be here and learn from your team." What she didn't say, what she wouldn't say, was just how much this moment meant. That she had memorized every word of the Carrile Inn's mission statement, studied guest reviews, learned their seasonal packages until she could pitch them in her sleep. This internship wasn't just a stepping stone. It was the first real doorway to a life she had only dared to dream about. And if you've ever found yourself in a place where you had to work twice as hard to be seen as half as worthy, Lena's story will speak to something deep inside you. The Carrile Inn operated with the crisp rhythm of a well-conducted orchestra. Every role had its place, and everyone knew the notes they were expected to hit. Lena quickly found her tempo, shadowing seasoned staff and absorbing the culture like a sponge. There was Patrick Linney, the events manager, a fixture in the hotel for 15 years. He wore his experience like a badge of authority, his tone clipped and dismissive, especially toward newcomers. His salt and pepper beard was always perfectly shaped, his shirts starched, and his tolerance for change barely a whisper. Then there was Nora Carryle, Gavin's mother and the hotel's true matriarch. At 64, she moved with regal assurance, having weathered economic storms and industry upheavals. Nora didn't resist change out of stubbornness, she resisted it out of wisdom, having seen how easily innovation could become a mask for dilution. Lena's first week was a ballet of blending in. She answered phones, filed invoices, helped manage housekeeping schedules, but she approached each task with intentionality. When organizing the supply closet, she created a color-coded system that halved inventory time. She learned the voices of frequent callers and greeted them like old friends. Small things, invisible things, but things that mattered. Still, excellence alone wasn't always enough to climb the invisible ladder. One morning, Patrick handed her a stack of contracts with the patronizing lilt only veteran staff can master. "Lena, sweetheart," he said, "need you to make copies of these. The machine's a bit fussy, so don't jam it like the last intern did." She smiled, nodded, accepted the task, but behind her eyes flickered a silent retort. She already knew about the copier's broken tray. She'd observed the repairman fix it days ago. She'd also noticed 3 of the contracts used outdated pricing from last season. But she said nothing. Not yet. Because in places like this, timing was everything. In the dining room, that was where the real game played out. Staff meetings took place around an elongated oak table, with department heads holding court and interns seated at the outer edges, just close enough to hear but not to speak. During one such meeting, Gavin beamed as he clicked through a slideshow. "Our fall wedding package is exceeding expectations. We're up 20% from last year. Feedback's been glowing." Lena looked up from her notebook, pen pausing mid-sentence. She knew those numbers. She'd studied the package metrics, but more than that, she had ideas, simple refinements that could elevate the guest experience even further. But for now, she remained silent, not out of fear, but because she was still learning the rhythm of this place. And when she did speak, it wouldn't be to blend in. It would be to change everything. Something wasn't sitting right. As the slideshow continued its confident rhythm, brimming with statistics, images, and praise, Lena felt an itch behind her ribs, a subtle alarm. The photos. She'd seen them before, not in passing, but intimately, during her long afternoons in the archive room. She'd spent hours cataloging promotional materials, flipping through decades of photos and brochures, organizing them until the visual history of the Carryle Inn was etched in her mind. And now, watching Gavin click through this polished presentation, she realized with a sinking certainty, these were last year's images. Not just similar, identical. The autumn wedding package had undergone a rebranding this year, shifting from deep burgundy and ivory hues to a fresh palette of olive green and gold, based on guest feedback about wanting something more natural and elegant for outdoor ceremonies. But the photos on screen? They were dressed in the wrong decade, reflecting an outdated aesthetic that no longer represented what the inn was offering. Lena glanced around the room. Patrick nodded along, arms folded with self-satisfaction. Department heads scribbled notes, oblivious. No one else noticed. Her stomach tightened with that particular kind of discomfort, the kind that comes when you know something important, but you also know you weren't given the space to say it. She felt it like a weight pressing down on her collarbones. Do you say something and risk overstepping? Or do you stay quiet and let a mistake pass unchecked? Then, Gavin mentioned the materials would be forwarded that afternoon to a dozen major regional travel agencies that handled destination weddings and could direct hundreds of potential clients. Her hand moved almost of its own accord, just slightly, then froze halfway up. She could feel the temperature in the room shift. Patrick's eyes locked on her with something like warning, or was it disbelief? Who was she to interrupt? A glorified intern, buried in the archives. That invisible boundary between observer and decision-maker pulsed like an electric fence around her. But then, a thought. What if nobody else sees it? What if no one else catches it in time? "Excuse me," Lena said quietly, the words barely rising above a whisper. Her voice sounded strange in the silence that followed, small but sharp. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think there might be an issue with the presentation materials." A beat of stunned quiet followed, not the kind that invites curiosity, but the kind that cuts through a room like a snapped string. All movement paused. Gavin's finger hovered mid-click. Nora froze mid-sip of her coffee. Patrick's pen stopped scribbling, his brow twitching. "I'm sorry, what?" Patrick's voice dripped with authority, the kind sharpened by years of not being questioned. Lena's throat tightened, but her conviction outweighed her fear. "The images in the wedding package," she gestured gently toward the projector. "They're beautiful, but I think they might be from last year's materials. The updated autumn palette is olive in gold, but these still show the old burgundy and cream color scheme." Silence. Thick and suffocating. Every gaze swung her way, and she felt the heat rise in her cheeks, her pulse thrumming in her ears like distant drums. Part of her wanted to shrink, to apologize, to undo the moment, but another part, stronger, held firm. She knew what she saw, and in hospitality, details were everything. Gavin frowned, turning slowly back to his laptop. He clicked through the slides again, this time slower, more focused. Patrick shifted in his seat, a flicker of unease tightening his jaw. "Patrick," Gavin asked carefully, "didn't we change the color scheme for this year's autumn package? Something about the burgundy feeling too heavy for outdoor events." Patrick cleared his throat, the defensiveness already lining his tone. "Yes, we did. But the design team was supposed to update the materials. These must be placeholders." But Gavin wasn't buying it. He opened a second folder, one Lena recognized, the finalized digital assets. Side by side, the difference was glaring. Every photo in the presentation was a relic of last year's brochure. Outdated, off-brand, misleading. "Oh, God," Gavin muttered, hands dragging through his hair. "We were about to send this out to a dozen agencies. Hundreds of weddings booked under expectations we couldn't meet." Lena's breath caught in her throat as the implications unraveled around her. She watched as the room collectively did the math. Disappointed brides, mismatched decor, bad reviews, potential cancellations, all of it. One error snowballing into a branding catastrophe. Patrick had gone pale. "I'll contact the design team. We can hold off sending the materials, get a corrected version ready by morning." But the mood in the room was no longer just anxious. It was humbled, because the mistake hadn't been caught by the seasoned managers. It had been caught by an intern, a young woman meant to observe, not speak. Nora, who had remained silent until now, set her coffee down with a quiet finality. She looked directly at Lena, no condescension, no patronizing smile, just intent. "What's your name again?" she asked, her voice calm but clear. "Lena Grace, ma'am." "How long have you been reviewing our promotional materials?" "Just over a week," Lena replied. "I've been organizing the archive room and reviewing our current offerings to understand them better." Nora nodded, slowly, thoughtfully. "And in that week you spotted something that the rest of us, some of us with decades of experience, completely missed?" The question wasn't rhetorical. It was pointed. Lena hesitated. She could demur, shrink, make herself smaller. Or she could tell the truth. "Yes, ma'am," she said firmly. "I believe attention to detail is a promise in hospitality. People book with us because they trust we'll give them exactly what we advertise. The silence that followed was not hostile. It was contemplative, but recognition didn't come. Instead, whispers began before Lena even left the room. Bit bold for an intern, don't you think? Made Patrick look bad in front of everyone. By the end of the day, Lena had been quietly reassigned. No more team meetings, no more front desk cross-training. She was now stationed full-time in the hotel's basement archive room. It was framed as a special project to dig into the Carolet Inn's history. But she knew better. It was exile. The storage room was cold, lined with decades of brochures, clippings, and glossy photographs documenting the inn's long legacy. It smelled of paper and dust. Lena could have sulked. She could have resented the punishment, but she didn't. Instead, she poured herself into the work. She cataloged everything, by year, by season, by theme. She created a searchable system for decades of materials. She digitized hundreds of fragile photographs. She turned the forgotten basement into something close to a living archive. And in the quiet, where no one was watching, Lena began to plant seeds of knowledge, of history, of change. Because sometimes, when you're pushed to the margins, that's where you find the space to redefine your value. Box by box, moment by moment, something extraordinary began to unfold beneath the low fluorescent lights of the Carolet Inn's basement. At first, Lena thought she was simply organizing forgotten photographs and brochures, dusty remnants of decades gone by. But as she sorted through them, a different picture emerged. This wasn't just a collection of outdated materials. It was a living, breathing narrative, a visual autobiography of the Carolet Inn. It told a story of growth, change, and resilience, not just a business history, but a testament to evolving love stories that had chosen this place as their setting. From the 1970s, she uncovered candlelit wedding ceremonies held in what had become the modern dining room. Intimate, romantic, each image carried the warmth of nostalgia. Then came the 1980s, extravagant garden receptions with puffed sleeves and hairstyles that defied gravity. The 1990s ushered in a more casual elegance, barefoot brides under towering oaks, laughter under fairy lights. Each decade reflected more than shifting fashion trends. It was the inn's quiet genius, honoring tradition while gracefully embracing change. Lena began seeing a through line, recurring motifs, design consistencies, visual choices that gave the Carolet Inn its soul, the golden light pouring through arched windows, the way vines climbed the courtyard walls, the symmetry between refined formality and southern ease. It wasn't coincidence. It was the inn's identity, whispered through every photo. With growing inspiration, she began curating themed collections, classic romance, garden elegance, intimate celebrations. Each set spanned decades, yet held a common emotional thread. Without even realizing it, Lena was creating the Carolet Inn's first comprehensive visual archive, a digital and physical library of its heritage, rich with personality and purpose. 2 weeks into her quiet exile, the door to the archive creaked open. Gavin Carolet stood there, pausing at the threshold. He looked more curious than commanding, less a CEO and more a man trying to understand what he'd overlooked. "What are you doing down here?" he asked, not with judgment but with honest interest. Lena looked up from her laptop, surrounded by neatly labeled boxes and photo albums. "Creating a historical archive system," she replied, gesturing to her work. "I thought if we organized the materials properly, they could be useful, for marketing, for clients who want to understand what makes the inn special. Our story." Gavin stepped inside, scanning the room. What had once been chaos was now order, albums categorized by year and theme, shelves meticulously arranged. Gavin stepped inside, scanning the aid, the tables, the bar stools. the chairs, the passengers, events, and emotional context. He picked up a collection labeled Classic Romance, flipping through images spanning 4 decades. Brides and grooms under the same grand oak, the same gentle light, the same sense of timelessness, even as fashion changed. "I was thinking," Lena began cautiously, unsure if her ideas were still welcome. "Some couples might be looking for more than trendiness. They want meaning, continuity, something that ties them to something bigger than one day. This shows them that." Gavin didn't respond immediately. Instead, he flipped another page, then another. The silence stretched, but it wasn't uncomfortable. "Lena," he said finally, "why didn't you leave after what happened in the meeting? Most people would have felt humiliated, dismissed. They'd move on." She paused, her heart thudding with the weight of the question, then answered, steady and sure, "Because I believe in what this place represents, and because proving your worth isn't something you do once. It's something you do every day, in the way you work, the way you care." That afternoon, something shifted inside Gavin, a realization, a spark. The following Monday's staff meeting didn't begin with the usual formalities. This time, Gavin walked in carrying Lena's leather-bound portfolio and his laptop, but instead of taking his usual seat at the head of the table, he stepped to the side, setting up a small presentation station. Most staff assumed this was routine. They sipped their coffee, prepared their notes. Lena wasn't even supposed to be there. Her reassignment had excluded her from such meetings. But moments before the agenda began, Gavin appeared at the archive door. "I need you upstairs," he said simply. "Bring the Classic Romance collection." Lena's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the materials. Returning to that conference room felt like walking into a courtroom, not sure if she was the accused, the witness, or the unsung hero. Patrick looked startled. Nora arched an eyebrow, silent but watchful. Others whispered quietly, uncertain. "Before we dive into the agenda," Gavin began, "I want to show you something that may reshape the way we connect with our clients." He opened the portfolio, a photo from 1978, a bride and groom beneath the oak tree still used for outdoor ceremonies today. Then one from 1985, another from 1993, 2001, 2019. The same tree, the same light, the same joy. "This," Gavin said, "isn't just nostalgia. It's legacy. Couples aren't just booking a wedding. They're becoming part of something ongoing, something real. We've had this story all along. We just forgot to tell it." Eyes around the room softened. Even Patrick leaned forward, his arms uncrossing. "These photos have been buried in our basement for decades, and someone who wasn't even asked, took the time to bring them to life again." Nora finally spoke. "Whose idea was this?" Shalez's expression was measured. Gavin didn't hesitate. "Lena's." She saw the value we missed. The room was still, but it wasn't the sharp, skeptical stillness of Lena's first outburst. It was reverent, thoughtful, acknowledging. In that moment, Lena didn't glow with pride. She didn't even smile. Instead, she breathed deeply, because after weeks of quiet work, quiet pain, and quiet resilience, her voice had finally echoed. Not through volume, but through vision. Lena glanced across the room at Nora, then down at the photographs spread before them like fragments of living memory. "I hope it's okay that I took some liberties organizing the historical materials," she said gently. "I know I wasn't officially asked to create these collections. I felt like the in-story deserved to be preserved, to be told." Nora didn't answer right away. Her eyes moved slowly over the photos, stopping on one from the early 1980s. Her expression softened, her lips parting slightly in recognition. "This was my cousin's wedding," she said, her voice catching with quiet affection. "I remember that day. The photographer captured something special." She held the photo up for the group to see. "Look how the sunlight pours through the Spanish moss right before sunset." She turned back to Lena. "How did you know to pull this one?" Lena smiled, a blend of nerves and calm pride. "Because the lighting and composition capture exactly what makes outdoor ceremonies here magical. It's not just about where we are, it's how the natural beauty becomes part of the emotion. That same light still filters through those branches every evening. That same tree still stands. Some things, they're worth preserving because they're truly irreplaceable." For the first time since Lena arrived at the Kerala Inn, something changed in Nora's expression. It wasn't simply approval. It was something deeper. Recognition, respect, an acknowledgement that wisdom can come not just from experience, but from someone who sees the soul of a place with fresh, unjaded eyes. Patrick cleared his throat and leaned forward. "I have to admit, this gives us marketing angles we've never had before. We could create wedding packages for couples who want something historically rooted, even offer anniversary events for those who married here years ago." The room began to hum, not with tension, but with possibility. Conversations overlapped with ideas, new concepts sparked into motion, and at the center of it all sat Lena's work, quietly born in the basement, now rising into the heart of the hotel's identity. 3 days later, Lena opened an email she had to read 4 times before believing it. Subject: Heritage Marketing Opportunity. "Lena, I'd like to discuss creating a new position, Assistant Director of Heritage Marketing. Are you available to meet this afternoon?" Began in calm and stem states which foster local healing and anatomy. The actual exercise is independent of the type of lifting. She sat frozen in the archive room, laptop open, her surroundings now feeling like more than boxes and photos. They were the stepping stones to a career she never even knew existed. Heritage marketing. The words alone felt right. Like this wasn't just a job, it was a mission. The meeting didn't take place in the formal conference room, it was in Gavin's office. Nora was there too. The atmosphere wasn't hierarchical, it was collaborative, forward-looking, grounded in belief. "Your archival work showed us we've been underestimating one of our greatest assets, our history," Gavin said, spreading brochures from competitors across the desk. Slick designs, glossy photos, trendy fonts. "But what most of them are selling," he continued, "is surface-level appeal. Instagram-worthy, sure, but forgettable. You've reminded us that authenticity doesn't age, and genuine history? That's priceless." Nora nodded, lifting one of Lena's curated collections. "Trends come and go. But this?" She tapped the photograph. "This kind of emotional continuity can't be fabricated. What you've built down there, it doesn't just make us different, it makes us irreplaceable." Lena's pulse quickened, but for the first time, it wasn't from fear. It was the rare thrill of knowing your work has not only been seen, but valued. The role came with real responsibilities, developing the inn's heritage marketing materials, consulting with clients who cared about the legacy they were stepping into, and building educational content on Southern wedding traditions. Even Patrick, her initial critic, had become an unexpected advocate. "I've been thinking about what you said," he told her one morning, "about couples wanting substance. Let's build something new together. Packages that fuse history and hospitality." In 2 weeks, Lena went from an overlooked intern in a basement to a name on the office door beside the events department. Her first official project was ambitious, a heritage wedding guide. She dove into research with the same precision and devotion she'd shown from the start. She interviewed local historians. She tracked down former staff from the 70s and 80s. She uncovered traditions lost to time and brought them back into the light. The guide wasn't just beautiful, it was revolutionary. It detailed customs like the symbolism of Spanish moss in ceremonies, the story behind Southern wedding cake pulls, and how traditions like bridal portraits evolved through generations. Every section was accompanied by archive photos that showed those rituals alive at the Kairilin through the decades. More than anything, Lena began working directly with couples, holding what became known as heritage consultations. These weren't just planning sessions, they were emotional deep dives, explorations of legacy and identity. "She's not just helping us plan a wedding," one bride said to her friends. "She's helping us understand what kind of future we're choosing." The change in staff culture was gradual but unmistakable. Lena wasn't just included, she was consulted, respected, listened to. Her voice shaped menus, guided design choices, even influenced how seasonal decorations were chosen. She was invited to represent the inn at regional hospitality conferences. Her talks on heritage marketing drew standing ovations. Other venues wanted to replicate her model. And the impact, tangible. The Kerala Inn began to attract a new kind of clientele, couples drawn not by flash, but by feeling. They stayed longer, spent more, brought guests, wrote raving reviews. They chose the inn not just as a venue, but as part of their legacy. 6 months after she raised her hand in that fateful meeting, Lena stood in the Kerala Inn's dining room, addressing a room of 50 wedding industry professionals from across the Southeast. The occasion? The first annual Heritage Hospitality Conference, born from one intern's quiet idea. "When I first walked into this hotel," she began, voice steady, "I just wanted to do a good job, learn something, help where I could. I never expected that caring deeply about details, asking questions, noticing what others overlooked, would lead to something like this." In the crowd, she saw faces she now considered family. Patrick in the front row, scribbling notes, now her partner on heritage projects. Gavin leaning against the back wall, arms crossed, smiling softly. And Nora, seated with hands clasped, eyes glistening not with sentimentality, but with pride. Because she had seen in Lena what the best mentors recognize, not just talent, but heart, not just effort, but vision. And Lena? She had turned that vision into something lasting, something irreplaceable. When others missed it, Lena paused, looking across the sea of attentive faces. "But here's what I've come to understand about heritage in hospitality," she continued. "It's not about having old walls or antique photographs. It's about recognizing that every guest who walks through your doors is creating a memory that could echo for generations. And that memory, whether it's a wedding, a reunion, or just a weekend escape, deserves to be honored." She clicked to her first slide. No branding, no logo, just a single candid image from 1972, an older couple, radiant and laughing as they cut into their wedding cake beneath a cascade of balloons. The same ballroom, the same chandelier, a different time, yet hauntingly familiar. "They returned last month," Lena said quietly, "to celebrate their 50th anniversary. They brought their entire family, children, grandchildren, and they requested the exact same table where they celebrated 5 decades ago. When I showed them this photograph, the grandfather cried." A silence fell across the room, the kind of silence not of boredom, but of reverence. The audience was spellbound. That's when I realized this isn't just a business. It's a vessel for memory. It's about creating experiences that live in family stories, and maybe, someday, get recreated by someone who wasn't even born when they happened. She then shared success stories from the last 6 months, a bride who chose the Carolet Inn because her grandmother honeymooned there in 1955, a reunion that bonded over shared heritage thanks to a consultation, a corporate retreat that used the inn's history as a team-building tool. What we've found, Lena said, is that when you help people connect with something bigger than themselves, tradition, history, continuity, you create loyalty that money can't buy. A hand rose from the crowd. A woman from Charleston. This all sounds beautiful, but how do you make it profitable? Isn't this level of personalization expensive? Lena smiled. That's the magic of heritage marketing. You're not adding costs. You're revealing value that was already there. Every building has stories. Every long-time staff member has memories worth sharing. All you need is the lens to see them. She clicked to her final slide. A chart showing the Caroline Inn's performance since adopting the program. Average booking value up 37%, client retention up 55%, referral rate doubled. People don't just recommend a nice hotel, they share an emotional experience, something that touched them. That's how legacy spreads. But the moment that sealed everything came when Nora Carolet took the mic for closing remarks. I've spent 40 years running this hotel, she began, and I used to think tradition meant keeping everything the same. But real tradition, it's knowing what matters and finding new ways to carry it forward. She turned to Lena. 6 months ago, this young woman was an intern none of us were paying attention to. She could have stayed quiet, done her assigned tasks, but instead, she chose to care. She chose to look deeper, and she reminded us that buried in our archives was a treasure we'd forgotten. The applause began quietly, but built into something powerful, like the first crack of thunder before a summer rain. After the conference, as Lena packed up her materials, a woman approached, elegant, sharp, the kind of person who commanded rooms without raising her voice. "Excuse me, dear," she said warmly. "I'm Margaret Chen. I run 3 boutique hotels in North Carolina. I just wanted to say, your talk today was the most inspiring thing I've heard in years." She handed Lena a card. "I'd like to bring you in as a consultant, help us build our own heritage programs, and I suspect I won't be the only one." A year later, Lena stood in the same basement where she'd once been hidden away, but now it was transformed. The dusty archive had become the Caroline Inn Heritage Resource Center, climate-controlled, elegantly lit, with displays rotating seasonally and lounge spaces where couples could explore generations of celebrations. But the biggest change wasn't the space. It was who was sitting behind the new research desk. "Mrs. Grace," said Maria Santos, the hotel's newest intern, looking up from her laptop. "I think I found something special from 1967. Letters from couples thanking the staff for going above and beyond." Lena smiled. "What kind of details?" Palmed couple's grandmother couldn't attend, so staff delivered wedding photos to her nursing home that same night. And another couple had their reception menu recreated from a restaurant that had closed during the Depression. Lena felt a quiet surge of pride, not for herself, but for the legacy continuing through new hands. "Those are perfect for the next edition of the Heritage Wedding Guide," she said. "Would you like to write a section on them?" Maria's eyes widened. "Really? You trust me with that?" "Maria, you noticed something others missed, and tied it to our philosophy of service. That's the heart of this work. Of course I trust you." Just then, Gavin stepped into the room, accompanied by a sharply dressed man. "Lena," he said, "I'd like you to meet Robert Whitfield. He's planning his daughter's wedding, and specifically asked for a heritage consultation." "Mr. Whitfield," Lena said, extending her hand, "I'm so glad to meet you. What brought you to the Caroline Inn?" Robert chuckled. "My wife saw your presentation in Atlanta. She said it was like having a cultural anthropologist help plan a wedding. And honestly, we wanted something real. Lena laughed, leading them into the exhibit. That might be the best compliment I've ever received. As she guided Robert through the Heritage Center, explaining the legacy behind floral choices and invitation fonts, she caught Maria watching, eyes wide, notebook open. And later, alone at her desk, Lena reflected. The scared intern who once hesitated to raise her hand had become a leader, a storyteller, a bridge between past and future. But more importantly, she'd built something that would outlast her. A system that recognized potential from the start, that made space for wisdom in every form. That was the true heritage. Not the photos, not the marketing, but the belief that everyone, from guest to staff, was part of something meaningful. Meaningful. And that meaning, once uncovered, had the power to change everything. As Patrick stepped away to continue his rounds, Lena paused, her gaze lingering on the documents in front of her. But her mind was elsewhere. That conversation had revealed something deeper than logistical planning. Her ideas were no longer treated as disruptions. They were contributions, additions that lifted the whole. Her voice wasn't just heard now, it was respected, trusted. 5 years had passed since the day she'd first walked through the grand front doors of the Carolet Inn, nerves knotted in her chest and dreams tucked quietly inside her navy blazer. Now she stood before an auditorium of 200 hospitality students at the University of Georgia's annual Career Development Conference, this time as the keynote speaker. She looked out at the crowd and saw a reflection of herself. Young, eager, uncertain. How many of you have ever felt like you had something valuable to say but weren't sure anyone would listen? She asked gently. A sea of hands rose, laughter, nods. She smiled. Good, Lena said. That means you're paying attention. That means you care. And that's what sets apart people who succeed in this industry. Not the loudest voice, but the one that notices what others miss. Her first slide appeared, not a glossy brochure or polished stat sheet, just a photograph, the image that had changed everything for her. The 1972 couple, cake knife in hand, smiles wide. Still together, still celebrating, still returning. I want to talk to you about the courage to speak up, especially when your voice shakes. Lena shared her journey honestly, the awkward beginnings, the quiet frustrations, the choice to care even when she felt invisible. She described the basement archive, the missteps, the breakthroughs, and the power of committing fully to work that no one had asked her to do, but that needed to be done. The hospitality industry, she explained, is built on relationships, not just between businesses and clients, but between colleagues, between generations, between tradition and innovation, and at the heart of every strong relationship is mutual respect. A student raised her hand. What if you're wrong? She asked, her voice a mixture of fear and curiosity. What if you speak up and make a mistake? Lena nodded, remembering that exact fear. Then you learn, you apologize, and you grow, because the fear of being wrong is almost always worse than being wrong, and the cost of silence is often much higher than the cost of correction. She shared examples, times she'd made suggestions that worked, others that hadn't, and one or two that had completely missed the mark. And yet, every time, she'd learned, improved. The goal isn't to always be right, she said. It's to always be useful. Later, during the Q&A, a young man asked how to navigate workplaces where hierarchy limits junior voices. That's an important question, Lena replied. Here's what I've learned. You earn the right to be heard by doing excellent work in the role you already have. Show care, show consistency, and always respect the systems you want to improve. Understand the why behind them before proposing change. Afterwards, she was approached by Dr. Sarah Martinez, head of the hospitality program. That was exceptional, she said. Would you consider teaching a guest seminar next semester? We're building a course on heritage tourism and cultural preservation. I think our students could learn so much from you. Teaching wasn't something Lena had considered, but she thought of Maria Santos and the other young professionals she had mentored and realized she'd already been teaching in quieter ways for years. "I'd be honored," she said. "What would you like me to focus on?" "Exactly what you spoke about today," Dr. Martinez said. "The courage to contribute, the insight to connect tradition with innovation, the belief that even interns can shape institutions." On her drive back to Savannah, Lena watched the sun dip low over the horizon, bathing the fields in golden light. Success used to mean climbing upward, earning recognition, proving herself. Now it meant something else entirely. Success was creating space so others could rise. Success was transformation, shared. Back at the Carolee Inn, everything had evolved. The Heritage Marketing Program had become a model for venues across the Southeast. The once-forgotten archive room now attracted families, historians, and destination planners alike. Consultations were booked months in advance. And more importantly, young professionals like Maria were now creating innovations Lena hadn't even imagined. On a crisp October morning, 6 years to the day after she raised her hand in that fateful meeting, Lena stood in the Heritage Resource Center. The space buzzed with quiet productivity. Maria, now Heritage Marketing Coordinator, guided David, their newest intern, eager, bright, a little unsure. "Every artifact here represents someone's most meaningful day," Maria explained. "Our job is to help them see how their celebration becomes part of something bigger." Lena smiled. Tradition wasn't a fixed script. It was a living conversation, and that conversation had grown. A gentle knock. Nora stood in the doorway. Now in her 70s, she was no less commanding, though her presence carried more reflection than edge. "Do you have a moment?" she asked. "I'd like to talk to you about the future." They walked through the lobby, where Lena had once arrived unsure of her place. Now every stride was grounded. She belonged here. Not because someone allowed it, but because she helped build it. She helped build it. "In our succession planning," Nora said once they were seated, "your name keeps coming up." Lena's breath caught, not from nerves, but gravity. "We're not talking tomorrow, but we want you to begin imagining it, leading, shaping, expanding. You've shown you can see what others miss, nurture talent, and create something lasting." They talked for an hour, consulting, partnerships, mentorship programs. Lena took it in thoughtfully, not with urgency, but clarity. Because her journey had never been about chasing a title. It had been about honoring what mattered and having the courage to speak when it counted. That afternoon, she stood once more in the Heritage Resource Center, not just among historical photos, but among proof that voices, even quiet ones, can move mountains. She picked up a new leather-bound photo book Maria had curated. Page 1, the 1972 couple. But now their image was joined by others. New families, new celebrations, new chapters, all drawn to the Carolee Inn because someone had once dared to ask, "What if we told a deeper story?" Across the room, David catalogued old photos. Maria spoke on the phone, helping a bride incorporate her family's immigration story into a wedding ritual. And Lena knew the work would continue, and it would grow. Because courage isn't a moment, it's a habit, a quiet decision repeated daily, to care, to contribute, to speak up with love and clarity. And sometimes that courage creates not just opportunities for yourself, but a legacy for everyone who comes after you. Lena Grace's story reminds us the smallest acts of integrity can create the biggest ripples, that your perspective matters, no matter your title. that your attention and care can reshape an entire organization. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to share your own quiet act of courage in the comments. And if you're inspired by stories like Lena's, stories about ordinary people creating extraordinary change, subscribe to join our community. Because the world doesn't need more noise, it needs your thoughtful voice. And it's never too early or too late to let it be heard.